NBC continues to expand their coverage across all forms of motorsports.
Matthew, let's talk a little bit about the Indianapolis 500, and we'll go back to real quickly, though. Perception is reality, Matthew, and you talk about your average fan that doesn't really understand TV broadcasting, doesn't really understand what they're watching, they just know they're seeing this as some race cars. But here's the thing. As we know about the road course, the majority of the fans are going to be located differently at a different location. Is it going to have the attendance the Indianapolis 500 is? No, of course not. But the perception is when you run it on main TV, NBC, this has kind of been the struggle. Why? I think this was the first time ever that the Grand Prix has actually been on major network television. The perception is there's a lot of empty seats. There's nobody watching this race. Why am I even bothering? That's not the reality because of the way that the road course is set up. And as you mentioned earlier, over off of Hallman Boulevard and the good viewing areas, that's where the fans congregate because they want to see the action on the track. So perception is reality. But then you have the other part going to the follow-up question on that, Matt. The Indy 500 is never broadcast here in the local market. Is the only place in the world that you can't see it live on television because it's tradition. And people love listening to it on the radio. I'm good friends with a lot of people in the IndyCar radio network. Jake Query's a good guy. I've known him for many years. Is a turn announcer. So certainly there's something to be said. They do a fantastic job of broadcasting the Indy 500. I'm guilty. I've got I'm at the track. I'm watching the race, and I still have the radio broadcast in my ear. So there's something traditionally about that. So I get that. But do you think we've come to a time, Matthew, and you can answer both of these questions at the same time, but do you think we've come to a time where it's time to broadcast the Indianapolis 500 live? And do you think that's something that NBC and Indianapolis Motor Speedway will come to an agreement on? Not this year,
Until
obviously.
the Indy 500 is consistently selling out, I would say the answer to that, and I know a lot of fans in Indianapolis won't like me saying this, no, it's not going to happen. Until Doug Bowles has the assurance that this race will sell every seat, every ticket, he's not going to pull that ban off. And that's how they've always done it with Tony George, how Tony Hallman saw it, even Jeff Belskis, et cetera. Until they are consistently selling out the entire track, I don't think that TV tape delay is going to be removed anytime soon.
No, and I agree. I mean, but we've gotten real close. I mean, last year was hot as hell. I mean, it was miserable. Thank God for the media center. I was spoiled that day. I was in the air conditioning there for the most part, as much free water as I could possibly get and stayed hydrated. But it was close to a sellout if it wasn't a sellout. So we're getting there. But you're right. Consistency says a huge thing. All right, guys, let's get back into our track action today. Steve, we went through all 24 drivers earlier. Matt went through his griditology. Obviously, you're with Speedway Digest. Your focus point a lot of times is NASCAR, but this is IndyCar. Any thoughts on any particular driver, any particular stable, any particular team, any thoughts that you want to chime in? Then we'll get into a little bit of NASCAR talk before we have to wrap it up and put a bow on it. Go ahead, Steve.
No, I don't have anything useful to add.
Guy, right? Okay.
Yeah, that guy. Let me go get a bingo ball, and I'll pick a number out. How about that?
Oh, that's fine. I know you focus on NASCAR. Matthew focuses on IndyCar, Formula One, pretty much anything with wheels. Matthew's all about it. Matthew, give us some final thoughts here on today's race, some final input and storylines, and we're going to get into some NASCAR talk before we have to move on to other things. Go ahead, Matthew.
Well, I'd say right now, if Felix Rosenqvist is ever going to break through for an first IndyCar win, today would be the perfect time. The conditions suit, but you look ahead in the little primer as we switched over to NASCAR. I tell you what, Steve, SHR looks super strong. I mean, qualifying 1, 2, 3, and 4 at Kansas yesterday. Seriously?
Yeah, I mean, it's good. I mean, they need to break through this season. We haven't been talking about them like we have in the past. I think it was like last year was like 1 and 3 or 1 and 4 races. We were talking about somebody over there in that stable going to victory lane, and aside from Kevin Harvick going to victory lane in the Twins back in February, they've been kind of a wash. So maybe they're turning this thing over, and they've been competitive. I'm not saying that they haven't been competitive. I mean, we've seen Clint Boyer, Kevin Harvick, both of them running very well. Daniel Suarez has come up a lot since he moved over from JGR into SHR. He's running more competitively now than we've seen him run in the past. But as a whole, we haven't talked about this organization on a 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 week basis. I mean, it was pretty common that we were talking about Kevin Harvick at least once a month last year, and aside from some polls and back in February, we've not had the time, and maybe this is just a package that everybody needs a chance to work through the package, and others have seemed to be really good at this. Penske Racing has been one that's been able to capitalize on this package, and but they're turning to, they're like everybody else. It's an ebb and flow in this sport, and maybe the ebb is coming up again.
And then you see further down the list, like Kyle Busch and Denny Hamlin not qualifying so well, also Chase Elliott. Is the fact that now they are locked in, is it more that these races are test sessions looking ahead to the chase itself, or is it just they haven't figured out the setup here at Kansas, and that's why they're further down the list? Is it a mix of both, or is it one thing, glaring over both?
I think it can be a mix a little bit sometimes. I mean, we heard back earlier this year after Bray Keselowski went to victory lane at Atlanta that, they said that, now Penske Racing kind of turn the corner and say, well, let's test some new things out. Let's try some new parts that we wouldn't necessarily go as aggressive on as if we were trying to chase down a win or chase down to get into the playoffs later this year. JGR is no different than any other team, to be honest with you. They do the same exact things that everybody else does, that when their drivers are locked in, yes, they're going to go and be competitive as they can be, but sometimes they're going to be very aggressive because these tracks that we're going to start seeing them in the playoffs yet again. So they're trying new things that they necessarily wouldn't take the opportunities to do if they weren't already locked in. So, but at the same time, Kyle Busch and Denny Hamlin, Kansas has not always been a track that they've been good at. I think their teammate, Martin Truex Jr., has been the one that has really mastered these 1.5-mile racetracks over at Frontier Row Racing, and now that he's at JGR, I think that maybe some of that will, the data that they acquired at Frontier Row will maybe help them. But then again, at the same time, like I said, I really think a lot of this is them trying new parts, new pieces, new setups, new ideas, and going a little bit more aggressively or trying new things that they necessarily wouldn't do, just primarily in the fact that they're locked in. And, Denny Hamlin with 2 wins already this season, and Kyle Busch, already in victory lane to his own self. I think, this is just something that they're going to continue to work on, especially when I think we'll continue to see it at tracks like this, Kansas, particularly because it's a playoff track, and when they get to some of these other tracks that we're about to come up to at the same time. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about it. Just give them the opportunities to do what they got to do, and we'll see how when they come back to Kansas or some of these other tracks in September and beyond, where they are compared to today.
We're talking with Steve Wilson of Speedway Digest, editor-in-chief of Speedway Digest, and Matthew Embury, our official IndyCar contributor. We're getting into our NASCAR talk here. We do want to get to the Kansas storylines and so forth, but as Steve, as you and I typically do, we kind of like to just do a quick run-through of all the series. We'll start with the Truck Series. Obviously, Ross Chastain wins the Gander Trucks race at Kansas last night. Good to see somebody rather than Kyle Busch win a truck race. Just saying.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very exciting race the last night with the Truck Series. But then again, Truck Series never disappoint no matter where they go to. But, Ross Chastain is just – I think we all think that he's a robot at this point. He's run every single National Series event over 3 different series this year. Last night was 28 National Series events. He's going to run his 29th tonight in the Cup Series at Kansas. Ross Chastain, we talked about him a little bit earlier about Ganassi, and he won last year with Ganassi at Las Vegas, and an opportunity at Darlington before his contact with Kevin Harvick. This guy, when you put him in good equipment, he just impresses. And Nice Motorsports, who he was driving for last night, when they came on the scene, they were one of those back barker teams. We never talked about them. They went to the garage very often. But Al Nice and everybody over there has put more money into it. They've hired engineers. They've partnered up with GMS Racing, which is one of the strong truck teams within the sport, and using some of their resources. And to Ross Chastain in the Truck Series, and every single Truck Series he raced that he's run this year, he's finished inside of the top 10 except for one time, which was 11th. So him going to victory lane last night, I think it was no surprise. It was just a matter of when it was going to happen, although I kind of feel bad for Stuart Friesen. That guy has finished second in the Truck Series I don't know how many times, and running out of gas with one lap to go. And I think that dashed his opportunities to go to victory lane last night, and that was all predicated on the fact of a bad pit stop where was miscommunication. It was supposed to be a 4-tire stop. It was only 2 tires, and as they dropped the track, they didn't have enough fuel in the truck. He ended up running out of gas, like I said, with one lap to go, which sent Ross Chastain. And I think that either way, those two are going to battle it out all the way to the end, regardless of the fact whether Friesen ran out of fuel or not. And I think people have to continue to look at Ross Chastain, and I think at some point somebody's going to, Chip Ganassi or, who he's still under a driving contract for if funding is found, somebody's going to pop up and say, hey, I want this guy in a car full time, and I want him to run for a championship.
Well, absolutely. And Matthew, we'll get your thoughts on this too, because it kind of bleeds over with the Indy Light Series. The Indy Light Series doesn't run quite as often as the Xfinity Series goes, but it's certainly a developmental league, and the road to Indy isn't always like we see here at Indianapolis this weekend in the month of May, where all the series are running together, and obviously NASCAR has their multiple developmental leagues, but the closest to is the Xfinity Series, and this year we've seen a huge increase in. I think it's okay. I'm kind of mixed feelings about it. Like, so for example, guys, Xfinity doesn't run again until the 25th of May, whereas we just had the truck race last night, as we talked about. So oftentimes that was kind of the way that the trucks were kind of sporadically scheduled out. It seems like we're seeing less Xfinity. It feels like we're seeing less Xfinity races than we have in the past, but maybe that's not the case. Maybe it's just a perception. But Matthew, how important is it to get these developmental drivers as many races as possible and as much coverage as possible? Because as we just talked about with funding, and that's a huge issue, especially in IndyCar, probably more so than other series, but IndyCar drivers, they pretty much have to go out there and find sponsors and find money and bring money to the table if they want to ride. It's not up to the Chip Ganassis or the Penske's to say, hey, we're gonna fund your ride. No, you come to the table with a sponsor that you've built, some money on the table that you've got some skin in the game, and we'll talk. So how hard is that? We don't talk a lot about the developmental series as we talk into NASCAR and IndyCar, Matthew, but what are your thoughts about giving them more track coverage, more track time, more network coverage, and so forth?
Be nice if I have my microphone on there. There we go.
I was going to say. Sorry,
Indy Lights right now does not have any live races other than the Freedom 100. I mean, they are tape delay races, sometimes a week or more beyond the actual time they are run. And unless you're a diehard like I do, where I listen to all the races on the internet, I don't have pictures, I don't have NBCSN, but for the people that don't want to listen to audio, it's tough to view these events, unlike for Xfinity. But the thing that's affecting the Xfinity Series, the reason why they've had to cut it back on events, is teams are running out of money. They are struggling to fill fields with competitive cars and discouraging teams from just showing up and, running a few laps and then parking it. I think right now the ability to find a full flight of teams in Xfinity and in Truck has been a big bugaboo, and it's certainly a factor in Cup. But I think if you look at driver development, they're doing a better job than I'd say in Indy Lights is with IndyCar, because I think you could say realistically, I think, and Steve could back me up on this, you got guys like Christopher Bell, Cole Custer, maybe even Austin